Hello and welcome to a More Perfect podcast. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing Jorge Galicia. Jorge is an activist with Turning Point USA. He speaks up against the Venezuelan regime and the dangers of socialism. Jorge is here to give his own testimony about what really goes on in Venezuela and so much more. So, without further ado, Jorge, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on, man. So I know you come from Venezuela and you left there a few years ago, right?
Yeah, 6 years ago to be exact.
But fairly recently that you can remember a lot.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so
I
so what do you remember? What's your story?
well, um, okay. So when I was in Venezuela, I went into law school. I
Mm-hmm.
studied. I technically I'm an attorney back there, and I started studying law back in the year 2014. And in that year, I also decided to join the opposition movement in Venezuela because that this was probably the first year that we started to experience like total collapse in the Venezuelan economy. We started to see like massive lines of people just to get a piece of bread, toilet paper, this kind of things. When
Mm-hmm.
you went into the supermarket, you could barely find any product that you were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Electricity was constantly failing. Internet connection was failing most of the time. So this was the same year when I started studying. When I started my law program in Caracas, and I decided to be involved with the Venezuelan opposition because I knew that the country needed a change. And
Mm-hmm.
that in Venezuela we're facing a horrible tyranny, a socialist tyranny, and of course they are not they do not tolerate really well dissident voices, right? So in the year 2017, probably 3 years after I joined a political party named Vente Venezuela on all of these opposition efforts, well, I got in trouble with police, unfortunately. One of my best friends was captured by police because he and I were involved in all of the massive demonstrations that were taking place in the whole country in the year 2017. And
Wow.
because of that, basically, I needed to disappear. I went into hiding for a long period of time. I needed to shut down all of my social media accounts, turn off my cell phone completely. I was put in some religious place. I am not allowed to
Mm-hmm.
reveal a lot of information about that, but I was put there. I was, being protected because the police was looking after me for my involvement and my participation in the massive protests. And
Mm-hmm.
well, this was a life-changing experience. I never imagined in my life that I was ever going to face you know, political persecution or I was ever going to fear police looking, about the police looking for me. And it happened, and basically that's the reason why in the next year, 2018, I needed to leave Venezuela and I came here to the United States. And I decided to just claim asylum because I know for a fact that if I return to Venezuela under these circumstances, I'm gonna end up in some Venezuelan prison, and that's not in my plan right now.
I wouldn't want you to end up in a Venezuelan prison. It doesn't sound like a very nice place.
No.
um, Okay, so I'm curious. How did you get out of Venezuela? Like I know people in Venezuela, and a lot of them will just cross the border into Colombia, correct?
Yes, that's a really good question. Actually, that my friend who was captured originally, he was released from prison 3 months after this event, but he was under probation, so he needed to go to court. I think every 8 days to sign a piece of paper to demonstrate that he was still inside Venezuela, and he was doing
Wow.
this like religiously for almost a year. But then he got tired of doing this, and he decided to escape Venezuela by doing exactly that. He went through the border between Venezuela and Colombia, basically hiding inside some truck or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. I don't really know the details, but that's how he got away, and now he's living a happy life in Uruguay, in South America. For me, thanks God, well, the thing was a little bit easier. I thanks God, I avoided being arrested. And as I said, the reason why people were looking after me, what were looking for me, or the police was looking for me, was because I was involved in the 2017 demonstrations. And
Mm-hmm.
in this year, we had millions of people on the streets of Venezuela doing exactly the same. So it is
Mm.
not true that they were going to spend a lot of resources looking for a single guy when they had like literally thousands of other people agitating and inviting people to demonstrate. So that's how I managed to, I kept my head low after this. I little by little, I raised my social media footprint, and I stopped participating in all of the opposition efforts for security reasons, of course. And then
Mm-hmm.
after a year of that, they kind of forget about you. They forgot about me, I guess, and I was able to leave, by through the airport. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I was extremely scared when I was taking the plane, because I didn't know if I was in some sort of list, or if my name was going to pop up at the with the immigration or authorities or something. Thanks God that wasn't the case, and I was able to leave. But as soon as I arrived here, I started speaking out as never before against them. I started to
Yeah.
do like media interviews and other kind of events, and that's how I know I went back into the radar, because now that I'm here, I have been, have been informed that the second most powerful guy in Venezuela, he has like a TV show, and he once put me in there because I was giving an interview, and he put an extract of my interview and throw it on his program. So they pay attention to the things that the diaspora does and say when we're outside.
Wow. I saw you were on Fox News. Was that the interview, or
Not
was it another one?
No, it was another one with with a YouTube channel, a
Ah,
little bit smaller than Fox News, but that's what the one they pay attention to, I guess. But yeah,
interesting.
I've been receiving a lot of good opportunities to expose them here in the U.S., and that's what I want to do until I have a free country again.
Along these lines of digital activism, YouTubers, you said you had to erase your social media. It's obvious that the Venezuelan regime it's petrified of people. It fears people who speak out against it online, and obviously it seeks to silence, suppress. Hell, even kill people who do those kinds of things. What capacity do you think digital activists have to harm the regime? Can you name any specific examples of digital media inciting real world change in Venezuela, like digital media, social media organizing some kind of protest? Does that happen over there?
Yes, I let me start by saying that they pay a lot of attention to what's being said online, to the point that they actually invest a lot to try to change the narrative, not only inside Venezuela but also globally. They pay a
Mm-hmm.
lot of these so-called influencers to go visit Venezuela. They take them on a tour, like through the beach in Venezuela, or the nice and looking touristic places.
Mm-hmm.
And they try to use these influencers to make them say like, "Hey, listen, Venezuela is actually a really beautiful country," which it is, but they are only showing like 1% of the country to these people, and these people are spreading this information online, saying like, "Yeah, Venezuela is not as bad as these people are claiming to be. Everything is working perfectly fine here. We should leave Venezuela alone." Yeah, I think whenever we are out there spreading the truth about how it is to live inside Venezuela, well, that produces a lot of damages, because I know that when people understand that there are really horrible human rights violations going on every single day inside of Venezuela, when people understand the causes, the consequences of practicing socialism, for example, that hurts a lot their brand, and ultimately, I'm sure they fear that because of that damaged reputation, well, they could face some sort of international backlash from other institutions. They could face sanctions. They could face, um, like diplomatic isolation, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why they
Mm-hmm.
fear whatever is being said online. Because, and by the way, that's the only way we have to kind of express ourselves somehow freely, because the traditional media in Venezuela is all censored, either because
Uh-huh.
the regime took took the ownership of the different newspapers and TV channels, or because
The
the owners of
state-sponsored media,
this.
you mean? State-sponsored media?
Yes, exactly. We used to have like a vibrant private sector with great traditional media platforms, and all of them are either out of the air already and being controlled by the
Mm-hmm.
regime directly, or they practice like self censorship. Some owners
Mm-hmm.
inside Venezuela, they haven't lost like their assets, and they control their media still, but because
Mm-hmm.
they fear receiving some punishment from the regime, they decide not to talk at all about politics. So they talk about sports, they talk about, I don't know, the artists or whatever, but they don't touch the politics at all. Or if they do it to praise the regime. so
Sure.
so yeah, the digital world is like the only thing we have left to kind of try to spread
I
the,
see.
the reality. Yeah.
I see. Interesting. But at least you can get the message out. I found it interesting that you were talking about influencers because I was just interviewing somebody, dissident from Iran, and the Iranian regime will invite influencers from Russia into Iran to tour Iran and the beautiful parts of Iran, which Iran is also a beautiful country as well. Um, and they'll create this online propaganda to show that Iran isn't so bad, and all the narratives about it are false. And it seems like Venezuela is following suit, which is
Yeah,
really
exactly.
interesting.
And as a matter of fact, Iran has a big influence among the Venezuelan regime. They back them militarily. They send them a lot of different supplies, including oil and military supplies as well. So
Hmm.
it's not surprising that they actually use the same strategies, because they have a really big relationship between both tyrannical regimes.
Authoritarian minds think alike, it seems.
Yes. Yeah. By the
Yeah.
way, the platform X was
I'm
um,
sorry, I lost you for a minute there. What did you say?
yeah. That I was saying that the platform X, a former Twitter, is no longer operational inside Venezuela, because the regime, of course, didn't allow them to keep operating. And of course, I guess you
Oh,
can still use it if you use like some VPN or something like that. But most people inside Venezuela don't even know how to use these alternatives. So yeah.
Jesus. That's really bad. That's also happens in Iran. That's crazy. Like I see in some in my mind, I thought that that Iran was like because Iran is more. It's known for being technically capable with drone warfare and other technologies, funding terror groups all over the Middle East. But I thought Venezuela just wasn't like this. But it seems like no, they're actually working in tandem with other countries. I assume they're working with China as well. Um, and I know they provide aid to Cuba. So it's all this. It seems like this big network of misery.
Yes, they absolutely are. They work with Iran, they work with China, they work with Russia, with Cuba, even North Korea is involved somehow inside Venezuela. They have some sort of embassy or consulate, something like that. Which I think Venezuela is one of the very few countries that has some sort of diplomatic relationship with North Korea, which is super crazy.
Yeah,
But
that is
but
crazy.
yeah, I think and I think that's the reason why. Americans should pay more attention to whatever is happening in Venezuela, because it's not an isolated case. Venezuela is part of a really dangerous network, and this network has the U.S. as its ultimate goal. And Venezuela is not even really that far away from the U.S. So it's like Cuba. It's just a few hours flying from Miami, and you can reach either of those countries. So I can see some security risks for America if people like Maduro or Diaz Canel in Cuba are allowed to keep oppressing their people so freely.
Yeah, there's serious risk. There's also been some talk recently, particularly of President-elect Donald Trump. If it feels so good to say President-elect.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Especially from President-elect Donald Trump, of Venezuela releasing criminals and then them coming up through the southern border. Can you comment on that at all? Do you know anything about that by chance?
Yes, absolutely. There is this really dangerous criminal organization named Tren de Aragua, basically
I've
Aragua
heard of them.
Train. Yeah, it's this organization was formed inside Venezuelan prisons. We have to know that the prison system in Venezuela is extremely corrupt, and when you have these prisoners, when these prisoners are keep some sort of power inside the prisoner community, well, they kind of start building, networks and doing really bad stuff. And these people, believe it or not, are basically able. Some of them are able to go out of prison and then go back, and basically it's like a hotel for them. It's not they're not really their freedoms are not really taken away. They're actually many of them are able to to operate in the territory. So the prison system in Venezuela has become like a basis of operations for many of these criminal networks. So uh, this criminal organization was originally operating only in Venezuela,
Mm-hmm.
but then when the economic crisis hit, they realized that they were not even able to steal a lot of money or property from Venezuelans, because all of us were becoming really poor, and they decided to leave Venezuela as well to keep doing their criminal activity in other countries. And ever since, I would say, 2016, 17, 18, we have seen a mass migration of good Venezuelans like me and many others, but also, unfortunately, among them are a lot of criminals that want to do really bad stuff in the countries where they are arriving. So we are hearing really concerning reports about these Tren de Aragua people arriving to the U.S. through the southern border, because, of course, nobody's really paying attention to who is getting in and why they're getting in.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really dangerous, because not only they are sadistic criminals, they commit rape, murder, they kidnap people, they traffic with drugs. Not only that, but they also have political connections with Maduro. And there was a Breitbart. They posted a report a few days ago that says that Venezuela is not only sending these criminals, but they are also sending among them spies and people working for the Venezuelan intelligence. And these spies are being sent here to target people from our diaspora, like former military leaders or opposition leaders who are, maybe advocating too much for some sort of actions against the Maduro regime, and they are gonna be using these Tren de Aragua people to, basically to order them to assassinate any political adversary that they may have here in the U.S. and other countries in the Western Hemisphere. So I think this is a really concerning security threat that not only that the U.S. has to deal with. And I feel, of course, the first step to avoid this is to, of course, seal the border. I think We need to secure our border as soon as possible, but also we need to start looking for ways to try to bring back democracy inside Venezuela, because by the end of the day, the main cause that why this is happening is because of the all of the economic collapse that we're seeing in Venezuela, and if we don't find a way to fix that soon, well, these problems are just gonna keep happening.
I had seen that article too, but I didn't know about the Venezuelan spies and literal members of the Venezuelan intelligence apparatus being inside of the United States.
Yeah.
The border crisis under Biden, it sounds like, was even worse than I ever could have possibly imagined. That's insane. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit broad here, but I want to focus on this year, 2024. There was a fraudulent election in Venezuela. The Maduro regime claimed 1 billion% of the vote. 1 billion% of the people voted for them, of course. And so they're just totally democratically elected. That's sarcasm.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that fraudulent election? I know you said that you were protesting in 2017, but can you give me any insight as to the reaction to the fraudulent election in 2024?
Yes. Okay. So first, let me try my best to explain why this election was fraudulent. First thing we have to mention is we were the opposition in general was able to organize like a primary to select who was going to be the candidate to compete in this election, right? And we did this organically. We didn't receive any funding from the government. We did it like using paper ballots and counting by hand. It was something really just the community organizing themselves, and we did it organically. And the person who won this primary was a lady called Maria Corina Machado, and she won with, I think, over more than 90% of the vote. It was ridiculous. She won overwhelmingly. Well, she was supposed to be our presidential candidate for this election, right? But guess what? Maduro said, no, you are not allowed to compete because, according to them, she was a criminal somehow and she was a threat to democracy or something, like whatever excuse they put in place, and they didn't allow her to compete. We tried to overrule that by protesting, by trying to convince the international community to add pressure, but well, we failed in those efforts, and we ended up competing with a guy named Edmundo González Urrutia, who is a former diplomat, and he's over 70 years old. He was almost unknown for majority of Venezuelans. Well, that's the only guy who the regime allowed to compete, which is kind of suspicious if you ask me. Like, why would you only allow a single guy to compete? Maybe does he have the favor of the Venezuelan regime? I don't know. I didn't really understand that move.
It is a little bit suspicious, and also
Yes.
Maduro shouldn't be able to choose his own opposing candidate.
Exactly.
That's just
Exactly.
I know everybody says oh, this, that, and the other thing is a threat to democracy, but it's becoming eerily familiar. It's becoming a real turnoff phrase, if I do say so myself.
Absolutely no, and now that you mention it, I forget to tell you that when finally Maria Corina accepted the fact that she was not going to be able to run, she chose her own substitution. There was a professor named Corina Lloris, who is also an old lady, who is a professor in the university I graduated from, and she decided, well, if I'm not able to compete, I want her to compete in my place, and I want you guys to support her. Well, guess what? Maduro also said no.
Bruh.
So yeah, so he said no to both Maria Corina and her substitution, and then we were forced to compete with this unknown guy named Edmundo González Urrutia, Well, until today, I don't really know the reason why he was the only one Maduro allowed to compete. It was back then. My opinion was like, you know what? We're not going anywhere with this fake election. We should just denounce fraud from now because they are not even allowing us to choose the candidate who is going to represent us. So it doesn't make sense to keep playing the game. And I think a lot of people wanted to do that, but the advice coming from the Biden State Department was, guys, you have to compete because we struck a deal with Maduro, and we have to keep following the process. So you have to stick to this guy. Well, okay, so we decided to trust the guy, and we went into this election,
Mm-hmm.
and the opposition was able to put witnesses in most of the electoral precincts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have an electronic voting system, and as soon as the election is over, these machines print like the results. They print the results, and
Yes.
most of the witnesses were able to collect the paper that these machines print. And
Mm-hmm.
when you count all of the votes that these machines printed, it says that we won by over maybe 70 or even 80% of the vote. We won by a landslide like never we have ever seen in our entire history. He won with I don't know, by millions of
Hmm.
votes. But then,
Wow.
in the night the night of the election, somehow Maduro said that he won, and I think the electoral authority in Venezuela basically made up a random number. I think he wrote it in a napkin, and he said, "Well, this is the result.
What?
Everybody, go back to your house. This is it. We don't.
What?
This is Maduro is again the president elect." And that's it. And people were like furious, inside Venezuela, people went to the streets like crazy. They
Mm-hmm.
started to tear down statues of Hugo Chavez and to destroy all of the pictures of Nicolas Maduro that they were in the streets. People were absolutely mad about these results, but then well, sadly, the police forces responded in the most brutal way possible, where thousands of people ended up in prison. Some other hundreds were assassinated in the middle of the street. And, the repression was so brutal that unfortunately a lot of people just went into panic mode, and they decided just to go back home. And people were being arrested just for having a meme in your cell phone because they were in the streets. They were looking at they were requiring people their cell phone to see if they had some sort of opposition content, and if they saw anything in your cell phone, you were going to prison. We experienced the most brutal repression right after the election, because people were really willing to take over the streets again and then protest massively again. But the regime was not willing to lose the stability that they have won in the past by
Mm-hmm.
fear. So they sent out military forces, police forces, and the repression was so big that people just decided to kind of remain in home until today.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hopeful that might change now that Trump is the president elect. And now that we're seeing someone like Marco Rubio being appointed, because Marco Rubio is someone who knows very well the nature of the regime in
Yep.
Venezuela. He has
Yep.
constantly advocated for more hardcore or hard pressure against Maduro. He wants to keep sanctions. He wants to add as much pressure as possible he can add.
I love
So
Marco
if
Rubio so
Marco Rubio is
much.
going to be in charge, yeah, if he's going to be in charge of the diplomacy, well, maybe we have reasons to be now a little bit more optimistic that we're going to be receiving better advices and better a little bit more help from the U.S. government.
Absolutely. Is this a normal thing that happens? I realize it was a incredibly heated moment in 2024, this year after the election, when there was just riots and protests in the country. Or was it mainly the metropolitan centers? Was it everywhere in the country, or just cities?
No, I think it was widespread across the country.
Huh. Okay.
Actually, even like in the rural areas, some people say it was even worse. Like the reaction from the people. We even received reports of we have this kind of surveillance system put in place that works. Like we have some neighbors that are affiliated to the Socialist Party in Venezuela, and they control like the food supply chain, and these neighbors.
Clap boxes, you mean?
Yes, exactly. So we have these people that are loyal to the regime, that are empowered by the regime, and they give them like, hey, take these boxes of food and maybe medicine, and you are gonna decide how to distribute this. If you see someone out of line who is maybe protesting or something, don't give them their
Jesus.
box or whatever. Yeah, it's a form of social control. But right after the election, people were so furious that a lot of people started to hunt down these other neighbors that are loyal to the regime, and many of them were unfortunately, well, I guess I'm going to say unfortunately because I do want to see a fair trial for these people, but they were brutally murdered, some of them.
Hmm.
So, I mean, it felt at some point that, this time around, the violence could be out of the chart
Hmm.
inside of Venezuela. And also I'm gonna say that even though I believe that every single election that Maduro has allegedly won has been through fraud, this one was probably the most obvious fraud that they have committed, because opposition was able to collect all the evidence to demonstrate that we won in a landslide.
Mm-hmm.
And until today, they haven't been able to prove that where did they get their number from. Like, for example, here in the U.S., you know exactly how every single precinct voted. Like you can see, well, in this precinct we have this number, we have this number,
Mm-hmm.
and you can double check and you see if it adds up or not, right? Well,
Yes.
they
Yes.
haven't released any of this information. They just released a couple of numbers, like Maduro this many millions, and the other guy this many millions. That's all you need to know. we
Yeah.
we don't know like the detailed information, precinct to precinct, of what happened. They haven't been able to reveal that information because, of course, they don't have it. It's all BS. It's all they made it up basically in a napkin, as I said, the night of the election. So,
Wow.
um, yeah.
Wow.
So I
That's
think that's why this time is different.
that's insane. It sounds like it's different because it's so explicitly fraudulent, and the backlash was so fiery this time. It seems like the regime is on the precipice of change. We can pray, at least, that that's the case.
I mean, it
Um,
is, but it's not, because they still have the support of the military and the police forces. So even
hmm,
though we are the
mm-hmm.
overwhelming majority, there's not a lot we can do, because by the end of the day, we don't have weapons. They have a lot of weapons. They have a lot of support from the military, and not only the military, but the Chinese, the Iranians, the Cubans, the Russians. They are all over there operating to keep Maduro in power. So,
I see.
um, yeah, even they don't have a lot of popular support, but probably they don't need it at this point.
No, Mao Zedong in China, he said something to the effect of politics flows from the barrel of a gun.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's a quote that's rang in my head for a while now in relation to authoritarian regimes. That's what he believed, and it sounds like that's still the case today. And it will always continue to be the case, in my opinion, with these dictatorships that run not on popular support, but on this politics from the barrel of a gun.
Mm-hmm.
As to the question of these as to the question of these authoritarian regimes, I want to do two things here. I want to go back in the past and then ask you some questions about the future of Venezuela. So,
Okay.
how did Venezuela become the authoritarian regime that it is today? It's often been said that you have to know the past to understand the present. And in part two of this interview, That's exactly what we'll be doing, exploring the past of Venezuela and how it led up to the authoritarian regime that Venezuela is currently suffering from. We'll also be going over covert CIA operations in Venezuela and much more. So you don't want to miss part 2 of this interview releasing in 1 week's time. Please spread this podcast to all of your friends and all your family. It's more important than ever that we have a gratefulness for liberty, and the best way to do that is storytelling. So Jorge's story helps us to really appreciate the freedoms that we have in this country, or at least it helped me appreciate the freedoms that we have in this country. We really don't know how lucky we truly are. Again, spread this podcast to everybody you know, and tune in next week for part 2 of this interview. As always, thank you for listening and have a more perfect day.